The single most important thing is to recognize that the current international financial architecture, the way it's structured, the way it's designed, is not delivering as it should for human rights and sustainable development. But there are human rights solutions to it. For instance, there's no reason why a program, a loan by the IMF or other interventions by other international financial institutions would not integrate human rights analysis, human rights parameters. In a nutshell, what are the state's obligations on human rights when it comes to health, social security, investment in housing, education? The argument is often that the international financial institutions are not bound by human rights. They do not have a mandate. But the reality is that the states that get supported, they do have those obligations. So those obligations are part of the rule of law, no? There has to be part of that equation. And so it's about including human rights in the country diagnostics that the IMF and other institutions do. It's about impact assessments, so make it systematic and part of the procedure to assess before and after the intervention. Make those assessments public, available to other parts of society, and in this way you can really make sure that those interventions do not undermine obligations like non-retrogression, which is part of the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And they support the obligations that states have in maximizing available resources for economic and social and cultural rights. And this is about designing budgets with that in mind. It's about designing revenue generation strategy, including taxation that has those obligations in mind. It's really what is behind the vision of the human rights economy. For too long, there has been a notion that the economy somehow is a human rights free zone, that the human rights norms and standards do not apply to that sphere of action of the state. And yet, economic policies, including budget formulations, they do affect so deeply the ability of states to deliver on rights. And the same applies to the global economic system and international financial architecture. Unless we integrate human rights recommendations in that architecture, in the functioning, the operations, in the procedure, and human rights provide guidance in the way states access financing and can use financing in loans, in debt, restructuring, that architecture cannot deliver as it should for human rights and sustainable development. So it's really creating that connection and breaking that silos that should never have been there. This has been much worse since COVID. Then we had the energy crisis, the cost of living, the interest rates. I mean, that is now a crisis, and it's a human rights crisis. And it should be treated as a human rights crisis. So not only is urgent to really engage and invest in the debt reform agenda, and again there are very practical and specific recommendations on that, including the establishment of a functioning debt workout mechanism that again integrates human rights parameters in the way that restructuring is considered. It's about integrating human rights obligations of states in debt sustainability analysis, which guide the whole sort of debt restructuring and debt management process. And it's urgent. It's urgent because we are really looking at phenomenal figures of, when you look at how debt servicing is eroding money funding budgets that should go to health, to education, to social security. At a time when we see that poverty for for the first time in a very long period, is actually going, the fight against poverty is going backward. It's very important that we really pause and look at the amounts that get lost in tax avoidance and tax evasion, because those amounts are amounts that are not used by states to deliver on economic, social, and other rights, and overall on sustainable development. And again, there are solutions. This is about policy choices. It's not that we don't know what needs to be done, but it's a question of creating momentum, and I think we are in that momentum to really shift and move to action and do something before we get into an even more deteriorated situation, because that funding is essential. And this is why the initiative to create a process for a UN tax convention, create a platform for a more inclusive process on setting the rules on international tax cooperation is so important. And it's equally important that human rights becomes a piece of that conversation, that it's recognized that this is about generating resources for human rights and sustainable development. Time for action is now. The momentum is now. 2024 is going to be a critical year for important, pivotal decisions. We have the Summit of the Future ahead of us, and we can't procrastinate these essential decisions that affect lives and livelihoods of people and their rights.